This is catastrophic news. Currently, there are 2 people and 1 swamp on Egghead Island who are about to give Marshal D. Teach everything he needs to completely destabilize the world. History is not going to remember this aspect of the Egghead incident. Tomorrow, the newspapers are going to be filled with reports of evil Emperor Monkey D. Luffy, beloved scientist dead, and the potential defeat of a marine fleet, a marine admiral, and an Elder Star. But what nobody will ever know is that this was the key turning point for the rise of Blackbeard and the beginning of the Great Age of Darkness. Dramatic, I know. But Blackbeard now has a crew member who can impersonate one of the 5 Elder Stars. And soon, he's going to know the location of 2 ancient weapons. So after Egghead Island, things are going to get very bad very quickly. In contrast to that though, this chapter kicks off better than I ever could have hoped, because we not only have the return of Oimo and Kashi, but for the first time, we see the full crew of the giant warrior pirates. That's a lot of big boys. And it's hard to get a precise number on them at the moment, but I would say lots. Lots is a good estimation. I count at least 10 new giant designs in this chapter, one of which is very curious because if you zoom in on his arm, there's a suspiciously sun-shaped tattoo there. So I imagine that all of these giant gents know exactly which mythical god they're here to assist, even if that god has no idea himself. We'll get to that in a bit because Luffy and Bonnie have a fantastic moment in this chapter, but this moment with the giants is so incredibly satisfying. Giants in One Piece have always seemed a bit underpowered because we only ever seem to encounter them in groups of 1 or 2, which are very manageable. Everyone gangs up, we focus down one target, we defeat said target, and then we knock off for lunch early that day. But then when you start adding your 3rd giant, your 4th giant, or in this case, your 14 giants, that's when their numbers start to make your numbers meaningless. To put it this way, the number of giants on Egghead Island right now outnumbers the amount of Marine Vice Admirals. So I'm thrilled that we're finally getting to see why the giants are so feared and revered, even by the world government, because they slice through that fleet like Anakin Skywalker in a room full of children. We hear a damage report later that 30 ships have been sunk, and that's mathematically quite convenient because that's approximately 30% of all of the forces brought to Egghead. However, that's also in combination with the Pacifista attacks, so it's hard to know how much of that is the doing of the giants, or actually if any of it is the doing of the giants. Their destruction might not even be being taken into account here because it's happening on the other side of the island. But the giants are spotted by Usopp, Nami, Chopper, and Edison. And you know, something I've just realized is that Chopper has never met Dory or Brogy. So in this chapter, he's thrilled to see Oimo and Kashi. Yeah, those are the guys I know. But he has no idea who the captains are. It's one of those trippy thoughts that happens for me because Little Garden and Drum Island are so close together and so far in the past that my mind often just conflates them as being practically the same thing. Dory and Brogy and Chopper, they all happen around the same time. It's very similar to my constant thought that Usopp and Buggy have somehow never met, which is probably for the best because who knows what would happen if those 2 gods were ever to clash. My favorite part of this section was easily Usopp though. I love that he was the first one to see the giants. I love the manly tears, Usopp contributing an honorable great river of Elbaf. And as much as I think he's been a bit underutilized on Egghead Island and Wano and not even present on Whole Cake Island, so very underutilized there, this could be his time to shine because his role models are here. He needs to do something to prove that he is worthy of setting foot on Elbaf. And out of necessity, we have one of these cute little recaps of Little Garden and a sort of any slobby. We get these every now and then, and we had a lot of them during the Reverie arc in particular, but it's because the target audience of Weekly Shonen Jump are Japanese teenagers. So if a 15-year-old picks up this magazine, the really crazy reality is that they weren't even born when Little Garden was being published. And the crazier reality is that they weren't even born when any slobby was being published. I love these little recaps though because I really like seeing Oda's simplified drawing style, and it makes me want a book that tells all of One Piece in a fairy tale way with these kind of drawings. We do have a brief status update of all of the other Straw Hats, although it doesn't tell us anything we don't already know. Lilith and Brook need to stop the Thousand Sunny or they're going to be vaporized. Although I do really love the gag of Brook saying that they won't be able to stop for tea, so he's just having tea en route. That is the power of Brook. Right now, he's making Lilith look like the reasonable one, and I'm also surprised that he hasn't asked to see her panties yet. Meanwhile, we have Jinbei doing what Jinbei does, which is excessive traveling. I've recently gone back and reread the Egghead Island arc, and mate, this has not been Jinbei's arc. He spends most of his time traveling and musing to himself, or whoever else will listen. And in this case, he's doing a bit of a about Zoro choosing now to pick a fight. And you know what? I have to say, I agree with Shark Dad. You've got Zoro and Rob Lucci fighting on their own as if they're the main characters, but the truth is that this fight has become the least interesting and most unnecessary with everything else going on. And I'm not really sure why Zoro's doing this. By which I mean, I'm not really sure why he's not doing this. And by this, I mean anything. Why is he not doing anything? There's no advanced Conqueror's Haki, there's no Enma sucking him dry, there's no Ashura, there's no third sword, and he doesn't even have his bandana on. So I'm I'm forced to conclude that Zoro isn't taking this fight battle very seriously, but that's counter to everything he's saying, which is that he's in a hurry. So either something has happened to Zoro as a result of his Enma incident, or he's just foolishly playing with his cat food. Either way, he needs to pull his pants up and get to work. Elsewhere, seeing Bonnie and Luffy speak together is like that classic set of theater masks. You've got two panels. On the left, we have Bonnie representing tragedy, and on the right, we have Luffy representing comedy. Because when you boil everything down in the classical view, every story is either a tragedy or a comedy. Or in the case of Leo Tolstoy, all great literature is about one of two stories. A man goes on a journey, or a stranger comes to town. And One Piece definitely fits quite cleanly into his theory. But I think that One Piece is one of the only manga series I've ever seen that can balance tragedy and comedy so perfectly. And this situation is a fantastic example. You've got the tragedy of old man dying on the floor, and then the comedy of wacky jester cracking jokes, and also potentially cracking the skulls of some old Spider-Men. But even Luffy seeing Vegapunk dying on the floor is somehow successfully played as a joke, because he does his now classic Gear 5th eye pop, which I'm coming around to. I don't mind when Luffy does it. Him doing the eye pop is weird and fun, but I still think it looks just a little bit off when he makes other people do it. And to the best of my recollection, this is the first time that Luffy has heard the name Nika, because Bonnie calls him Nika, but Luffy completely disregards this. He moves on pretty quickly to talking about Bonnie's punch, which is a pretty good summary of Luffy in general. A man born into greatness who couldn't care less and decided to earn that greatness by taking his own path instead. Luffy then unleashes a glorious new dawn attack, which sends Saint Saturn blasting off again. Was it just me though, or did anyone else find this attack just a little bit underwhelming? Which I don't think is a fault of its own. It's a beautifully drawn series of panels, but I can't help but compare it to the Kuma punch, a far less damaging attack, but one that came equipped with so much more emotional weight and satisfaction. It was like seeing St. Charles get hit by Moscard and then later being hit by Sai and Leo. It was great to see, I enjoyed it, but nothing's gonna top that OG Charles punch. I have to say though, St. Saturn is starting to hit me as a bit underwhelming as well, because as per usual, he just stood there and took another attack. He did fire back at Luffy, but it didn't do much, if anything. He also just stood there whilst Luffy and Bonnie had their lovely chat. So I gotta say, at this rate, Egghead Island is going to be a pretty resounding victory for us. Because the world government have selected Saint Saturn as their goalie, but he's refusing to save any balls because he views them as filthy and below him. So we just keep scoring and scoring, and that's all I've got for this sports metaphor. And we'll pick up again with Saturn later, because the most interesting thing about him is where his soon-to-be Spider Corpse landed. But we do have a rather dire, serious situation happening with Vegapunk. Since the beginning of this arc, I'd say that his death flag was hanging about half-mast, but we are fully raising it now. The dude is in such bad condition that if he were to be moved, he will die. It's like if the Grim Reaper were a T-Rex. He can't see you if you're not moving, so you're only alive while staying still. Although I'm pretty sure that that's something that Jurassic Park just made up. Dinosaur people, let me know in the comments. I know there's a lot of you. You were all very vocal during the raid on Onigashima correcting my dinosaur facts, so I defer to you. It's pretty worrying though, because if there were any possible way to heal Vegapunk, you'd think that Vegapunk would know about it. We're on an island packed with technology hundreds of years beyond our capabilities, made by the world's greatest genius, and even he doesn't see a way out of this. So how does this end? Probably not well, unless Luffy pulls some magic out of his butt, which to be fair is both metaphorically and literally possible. I tell you what though, Sanji is pulling his weight big time in this chapter. Zoro may have decided to screw around and play with the cat, not put his bandana on, but Sanji is taking this fight very seriously, which you can see because he lights his cigarette in front of Kizaru. That's Sanji's equivalent of the bandana. The steps go as such: light cigarette, inhale deeply, exhale, then beat the ever-loving crap out of whichever person is standing in front of him. And having him block Kizaru's attack was absolutely magnificent. Not so much because of how cool Sanji looked, but because of the face he made Kizaru pull. This is undisputedly my favorite face that an admiral has ever made. It makes Kizaru look like he accidentally shit himself mid-fight and is wondering how long he can pretend before someone points out the smell. Even Luffy couldn't make Kizaru pull a face like that. But also Frankie is shocked that Sanji stopped Kizaru's laser. And I'm not entirely sure why. I don't think lasers were ever deemed as anything particularly special, as in something that couldn't be stopped with basic armament haki. And the obvious explanation would be that Sanji's genetic enhancements have made it so that his body is so so tough that he can block lasers in his base form, completely haki nude. And you know what? That's not too far out of the question. When Sanji awakened on Onigashima, his body was capable of all sorts of weird crap. And this is supported by the fact that Sanji's eyebrow has changed position again. The swirly part on this side is usually in the center of the face, and when it switches, that indicates that the genetic modifications are in play. It's a very subtle transformation. It's not obvious, loud, and in your face like Gear 5th. And as a result, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot of people who read this chapter and missed it. But look, I thought that Sanji's arc was pretty much wrapped up after his fight with Queen, but we are still continuing because he's quite possibly the most appropriate person to be fighting here. We're on an island full of genetic cyborg things crafted from the legacy of Mads, and Sanji is Vince Smoke Judge's contribution to that legacy. He's basically a hornier pacifista. And he's a lot like Luffy, disregarding the actual reasons for his power in favor of his own personal agenda, which is love. Sanji says love is what stopped Kizaru's light, and Kizaru has a fantastic sense of humor in response, suggesting that all of physics needs to be rewritten. Thanks for that, Sanji. But things are not looking amazing for Kizaru in this situation. Just tackling Luffy was enough for him, but going up against both Luffy and Sanji might be too much even for this Marine Admiral, which is why we really need Saturn to return to the fray to balance things out. But he had a very concerning encounter during his time on the bench. As suspected, the Blackbeard pirates were indeed on Egghead, and it was Katarina Devon and Van Alga. But Katarina Devon sees Saint Saturn and makes a facial expression that I never want to see anyone point in my general direction, because this liver panel makes Devon look almost Big Mom-esque, as if she spotted a particularly delicious meal that must be devoured immediately. And then she touches him, which is huge. In case you've forgotten, Katarina Devon has a mythical Zoan-type devil fruit, the Inu Inu no Mi model Kyubi no Kitsune, which allows her to transform into other people, much like Bon Clay's devil fruit, but probably much more better. And I guess this confirms that she actually does have to touch someone to take on their appearance. But this is such a huge win for the Blackbeard pirates, because they can now impersonate one of the 5 elders. And after accomplishing this touch, Katarina Devon claims that their mission is complete. And that's quite chilling, because if their entire purpose on Egghead was to access Saint Saturn, then that means that there is a very, very high level leak within the Marines and Orwell government. For security reasons, Saint Saturn's presence on this mission was kept secret until very recently. And the Blackbeard pirates showed up at Egghead anticipating this. They were here about half a day before the siege even began. So they must have some pretty serious insider information. At the very least though, Blackbeard no longer has to fear the Seraphim. If they get attacked by one, then Devon can simply transform and bam, she's at the top of the command hierarchy. And if anything, this now gives them the ability to commandeer the Seraphim and continue the trend of emperors using world government weapons against them. But everything happening here is all according to Blackbeard's plan. He needs the authority of an Elder Star to enact something, which is probably why he chose to give this fruit to Devon in the first place. Or he chose Devon specifically because he knew she had that devil fruit in Impel Down. It all goes to show that as goofy as he seems in battle, you cannot underestimate this man, because he has a plan. As a tactician, he may be one of, if not the best in the world, having carefully crafted a crew of fruit users designed to min-max his way through to world domination. The scariest thing about Blackbeard is... I take that back. The scariest thing about Blackbeard is that he represents the unknown. He's a big void of mystery, sinister mystery. But the second scariest thing is that he's so damn efficient. He gets the most accomplished with the fewest resources. And as stated in this chapter, he's a very special boy due to his lineage, which Devon is surprised that Saint Saturn even knows about, and I suspect that he only found out very recently. If I had to guess, I'd say that's what Shanks visited the 5 elders to discuss, Blackbeard's family secrets. And that family secret isn't even the Will of D. Blackbeard has never kept that name a secret. Marshal D. Teach is even on his bounty poster, so whatever this lineage is, it goes well beyond the Will of D. And at the end of this chapter, Swamp Nakama finally returns, but alas, he is someone else's Nakama now, begging to join the Blackbeard pirates like he's Teach's equivalent of Bartolomeo, which I really hope he is, because that would set up a pretty fun fight in the future. Let's say we're in the final arc and we've got Luffy and Blackbeard fighting over here, but then over here, somewhere else in a significantly smaller, less impressive arena, we've got Bartolomeo versus Caribou, the battle of the fanboys. This is a catastrophic development though, because as I always stress, Caribou knows too much. He has the locations of 2 ancient weapons, having overheard the discussion on both Wano and Fishman Island, both locations that I now fear for. Especially Wano because it's so close and an easy next stop for Blackbeard, but especially Fishman Island because it has practically no defenses against him. And consider this, we still don't know who assisted Luffy with the food situation, and should that person have somehow been Katarina Devon, then she would have touched him as well. So maybe Madame Charlie was right about Luffy destroying Fishman Island, or at the very least, a person who looks suspiciously like Luffy. And if you want to be the first to know how this plays out, then don't forget to subscribe to this channel for consistent injections of One Piece culture administered directly into your YouTube feeds.